Yesterday we talked about how the Vikings might move to a little bit more counter, but what is counter? What do you have to care about with counter? Let's do a quick breakdown of counter on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who make Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. Kick it on in the morning or whatever. I appreciate you all so very much. Or if you are new, also hello, welcome, love you. My name is Luke. I will be your host today, and you can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can search it out on any podcast listening app, including the SiriusXM app. You can also find this show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Today on the show, we're going to do kind of your beginner to whatever the next level is. Beginner to novice, or novice to beginner. I don't know which one is earlier. To counter. The run play counter. The reason for doing this is one, I mean, it's May. Let's, do what's interesting. And I like counter. Counter's interesting. But also, somebody brought up in the mailbag yesterday the idea that the Vikings could move to more counter. And maybe that's why they like Blake Brandel more. And maybe that explains some of the O-line decisions that they've made and how they've kind of, Ed Ingram's more of a mauler than an agile type guy. And Darisaw is the same way, even though he was a Spielman guy. And Reisner was the same way when they picked him up and stuff. So maybe that's like something that they want to do. And regardless, every NFL team has a little bit of gap in their playbook, whether it's counter or power, which honestly, like true power, I don't see that much of nowadays. Because I think if you're going to try to get a double on that 3-tech, you might as well just run duo. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to break down the basics of counter beyond just what counter is, what defines counter as counter, but some of the ins and outs and nuances and details of why you would do counter this way versus that way. Also today on the show, we are continuing with the Everyman series. So later in the show, we'll do Henry Bird, a guard. Figure we got to do an offensive lineman if we're going to do a counter episode. So the basics of counter. I'll probably end up drawing some of this, but most people who listen to this show listen to it audio only, so I want to make sure I'm respectful of that too. Counter is defined, in my opinion, and you're already going to run into people that have a problem with this, by having two pullers. You have to have two pullers for it to be counter. I think that's the defining trait of counter. And everybody else down blocks. When I say down block, you're blocking down the river, away from the action. If the run is to the left, that means you're blocking the guy to your right. And usually the puller will be, I would say the most common thing you see in the NFL is GY counter, the guard and the tight end. So you'll be running this to the weak side and the tight end will come over all the way across the formation and pull, as well as the backside guard. I'm going to say backside and front and play side, rather than like left or right here. So the play side guard is, if the run is to the left, that's the left guard. You get it. In non-NFL scenarios, I think you probably see a little bit more GT counter, guard tackle counter. I'm going strictly off of vibes there. So if there's some like snap data or something that somebody has that says that it's actually more popular this way or that way or whatever, like whatever. But it's functionally going to be the same idea, and it's just a different guy coming. So the advantages and disadvantages of counter. The advantage is that for everybody but the pullers, the block is really easy. The read for the running back is really easy. And it's pretty hard for the defense to uncover it. This is like the highest level main point of counter. When you are, say, looking at the center, let's say the center is not pulling, but the center can be a puller instead of the guard if the front is right or whatever. We'll get into it. But let's say you're watching the center and you're playing against a classically zone team. That means that if the run is to the right, the center is going to go to the right. The center will always go play side if it's zone. If you're not part of like a double team or something like that, you will be working to the play side. So the line in general will work play side on zone. And so defenses can key on that. They can see where that first step is. Where is everybody going? Now I can figure out where the run is going that way. And I can you train yourself to instinctually react to the way that the line flows. But on counter and any gap scheme, most of the line will flow away from where the running back is going. So if you have a zone team and you really have established on your tape that this is the way that you're going to run the ball, 8 times out of 10, that counter punch, no pun intended, is going to do a really good job of getting people off balance. And I will say right now, I think the Vikings did a really good job against the one game I'm thinking of is actually not a Vikings game, of a team that really got them on this. And that's the Saints getting the Carolina Panthers. Pretty good. In Monday Night Football week 2 last year, which is a game that I watched preparing for the week 4 Panthers game. I remember seeing that, like, man, every time the Saints busted out their counter, the Panthers were really over pursuing on that zone. You can really like get them that way. That is what I think the best thing in zone. But it's simpler than that. For counter, everyone's job is pretty simple and easy. If you down block, just block the guy to the backside of you. And because that guy is either going to flow the wrong way, like if he goes away from you, he's taking himself out of the play for you, or if he does correctly read that it is, a gap run and he does flow the correct way, he's flowing right into you. And now you can pick him up. There's no reaching, there's no agility, there's no chasing a guy down, there's no what if you don't get to the right shoulder. The only way that guy can remotely hope to make the play is through you, and it sets you up to have a really nice, easy, simple job. Just drive the guy. Just go be strong. I love that about counter, and I love that the defense has to think about so many things. They have to key on the pull. They have to figure out who the down blockers are, who the pullers are. Do I shoot the gap or don't I shoot the gap? How do the safeties come in and sort out which pullers are going to go which way? There's so many complexities that it gives to the defense. So personally, I just really love counter. Now, I've been covering a zone run team since I think it was 2017 since they became a zone team. So it's been a while since I've covered like a gap team, and my opinion of gap has gone up and down as I've learned different things about different ones. But right now, I like gap a lot. I like counter. I think it's an awesome play in counter rules, run counter. So how to run counter well and how to optimize counter is where I think the conversation gets very, very, very interesting. From things like who the pullers should be, how the pullers step, how you can use that to exploit mismatches, a lot of really fun tools in the world of counter. But maybe the most important one is how you teach them to pull. So when you are pulling, let's say it's GT counter, guard tackle counter, and the GT just means the guard and the tackle are the pullers. GT counter will have 2 guys pulling with each other, right? So you have 2 guys, and these are the guys with the hard job. They have to step back. Some call it a bucket step, I'll just call it a pull step. Honestly, I think that's simpler. And lose a little bit of their depth so that they can run along the line. And usually the first guy is a kick player, or a kick out player is what I'll call them sometimes. They have the kick out block, where they're supposed to take what is usually the edge rusher, but whoever's there, whoever is the contain player, the force player, sort of the outermost defender, and widen them. That's what you want. You want to widen them so that the running back has lots of space to work with. And then the second puller is going to be a lead blocker, or some will call it a read player, that essentially runs in front and acts like a fullback. You get the first most dangerous guy, whether it's the linebacker coming around, whether it's a safety that's come from depth, maybe somebody missed a block and you got to clean it up. You have to be like kind of adaptable that way. Both the pullers have to be a little bit adaptable. That's the simplest way to do it. Now, there's something you got to know about run fits. So defense, this is the only like run fit thing we'll talk about. And if you know box versus spill, that's all I'm going to say here. There are kind of 2 classical ways for a defense to handle a run play. One is boxing, where The edge rushers will play contain and you hope to funnel everything inside. And then there's spilling where the edge rushers will sort of pinch their like inside to B gaps or C gaps, depending on who's there. And you hope it's spill and kill. You hope that you force the run to go outside, which takes long enough for the defensive backs to come up and make the tackle. Very much valid schools of thought. Most teams will run a little of both. You'll get into heavy debates on which is better against what and stuff. Totally different conversations. So as the offense, you have to be ready for both. So if they box and you just have somebody playing contain, that kick out player can just do his job. Great. Go hit him, smack the crap out of him, go take him to the sideline, hand him back to your coach. If they spill, which means that guy's going to try to get into the inside of you, that's like where the counter run wants to go. So you either have to dig him out, you either have to kind of get it at like an awkward angle and essentially get to the near shoulder of that spill player, which is where he doesn't want you to be. So he's going to resist that a little bit more than a contain player will. Or you just say, okay, I'll just ping you onto the inside, and now this B gap run turned into a C gap run, and you just trust the running back to figure it out. And the latter is what most teams will do. That's the basic rundown of counter. But who pulls? What do you do against certain fronts? What do you want out of counter? That's what we have to go into next. And don't forget, we're going to do the Everyman series as well. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time. If you aren't emotionally invested enough in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals, you can go ahead and gamble on it. Right now, the Timberwolves are plus 450. So if you want to just hit that money line and stress yourself out a little bit more, you can find that there. Or you can bet on NFL futures, hockey, the last bits of the hockey tournament, baseball games, whatever you want, whatever you can find on there, you can find it at FanDuel.com. And if you are new, you can sign up at FanDuel.com/lockdown and get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So go to FanDuel.com/lockdown, place a bet. If it wins, if that $5 bet wins, you can get $150 back in bonus bets. That's 30-1 for those of you counting at home. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks a million for hanging out and listening to the Locked On Vikings podcast. When you are done here, go check out Locked On Timberwolves. You must. Of course, you have to. But when you're done with all of that and you still want more Minnesota sports, go to Locked On Minnesota Sports, the YouTube channel, and go to the live tab. You can find a 24/7 stream, as much Minnesota sports talk as you could ever handle. Moving on to the nittier grittier part of this. I think I have to draw for this part. So, we're going to talk about fronts, and in particular, what you want out of counter and when you want to run GT counter versus GY counter versus CT counter. Maybe you want the center to pull, which is kind of hard because they have to like snap and then pull at the same time. And the key to all of it is who is making a down block and how much space do they have to cover, and also, is there somebody in the gap that a puller is about to vacate? Because protecting that gap is really, really difficult. Let me draw it out. If you're just an audio listener, don't worry. You're not going to miss anything vital. You'll still be able to fully follow this. But for people watching visually, this should help. So if the idea is to make everything nice and easy for everybody, you want as many down blocks as possible. That means you usually want to run counter when you get a front where the nose tackle is going to be on the back side of the run. That means that the center gets a nice, easy down block on him. And that also is going to mean that the tackle and the guard are going to have a double team on the on the 3 technique. That's going to be just like how that works out. If you can't see the diagram, you're just going to kind of have to like picture that best you can. The difference is if you have a zone situation, if you have a double team in professional football, somebody is probably going to come off of that double team and work up to a linebacker. On counter, you leave the play side linebacker unblocked. We'll get to him. And you go to the second guy. This is going to be the guy to clean up, cutbacks. This is going to be a guy with a pretty important job, usually like a middle linebacker. And now you have somebody who is able to basically cut him off as he tries to get over the top. You're able to kind of cut him off, and it makes that guy's job a lot easier. He doesn't have to cover a lot of ground because that linebacker's coming to him. So those blocks are easy. The tough part is the pull. And in the one that I happen to be drawing right now, I'm going to have GT pull. And if you'll notice, you might remember me talking about the B gap bubble a lot on Locked On Vikings. In the thing that I've drawn up here, where there's a tight end and an edge rusher outside of it, which happens a lot, you'll have a B and a C gap bubble. You have this big giant chasm in the middle of the front. And a lot of teams like to just run straight into that because it's just a softer entry point to the defense. And that's great. That's zone, duo. They love to do that. Counter likes to take advantage of that by basically taking the linemen in that and just sort of reshuffling them over to the top. So the guard will go kick out and he'll take somebody that's probably the edge rusher. And then the tackle will then lead up top and he'll be the guy getting the play side linebacker. And this linebacker is probably going to meet him closer to the line of scrimmage. So you're going to have a more like fullbacky, lead blocking situation. It looks very fullbacky. And then you can have the tight end do a whole bunch of different things. You can have them chip a backside player that's, usually chasing this play down and usually just kind of trust that either you're going to read them if you got a read option quarterback, or you're just going to kind of trust that they don't make the play. You could have the tight end try to block them or try to work up to another linebacker or something like that. Honestly, if a strong side linebacker beats a counter weak play, if he makes that play, that's just the play of the safety's life or the linebacker's life, and good for you. Angles wise, we are looking for your guy, your lineman's guy, to be downwind of him. You want guys to be blocking guys that are on the other side of the play. So if you get a worse front, let's say they shift it to more of an over front, where now if you're trying to run counter, the nose tackle's on the wrong side of the center and he'd actually have to reach, and not having to do that is the entire point of counter. You might change who is actually pulling. There's a college that I got this from that does that. And if you think about it, if you take the backside guard and tackle away from the play, and there's a 3-tech in the backside B gap between where the guard and tackle were, that guy's shooting the play and shooting the gap, and he is just exploding this thing. You're going to have Aaron Donald plays all over you. You don't want that. So you can take the guard and say, you're not pulling anymore. You're going to handle this backside 3-tech. And now the center can be the one that pulls and kicks out. And hey, he's actually got a quicker path to things. So, maybe he's a little bit closer to the action. Maybe he can do something good. And then the tackle would still pull like normal. Those are the kinds of things that get you a little bit more of an advantage and a little more adaptability to the front that you're looking for. And then to expound on that with tight ends, a lot of times you will run counter to the weak side. That means away from the tight end. And for like GY counter, it has to be weak side because the Y has to pull. That means he has to start out on the opposite side. And so you got to run to the opposite side of the tight end, AKA weak. And the reason you do that is he's faster. That's kind of it. And you got a lot of really fast edge rushers and 3-techs out there. A lot of dudes that shoot gaps really, really fast and really fast linebackers. And you just kind of need to match that speed by using the tight end a little bit more often. And he's going to run into a linebacker or a safety pretty often as well. So you're not going to be too worried about a mismatch there. So you're pretty safe to do GY counter at the NFL level. At the college level, the athleticisms are very, very, very different. And so you want different tools to deal with the different challenges that presents. So that's why you'll see a lot of that. Sometimes you will run counter to the strong side, and then the tight end just becomes another down blocker. Pretty simple stuff. And then if you really want to, add some fancy stuff onto it, you add like motion, right? You want to make it look like you're running zone to the other side if you are a zone team. Every zone team has this counterpunch. Everybody runs a little bit of it. They've got something installed, right? How much they practice, how much they dedicate to it is going to be the question, and then that will determine how the role that it plays in the offense. If it is just a counterpunch, if it is just kind of a subversion on the norm, but really we still do zone or duo, that's where the Vikings have lived. Or are they going to lean into this more as a staple and use more straight up running as just another variant of their run game, just another thing to make the defense prepare for? But will you be like, ideally, you can go into a game and say, well, we could be counter all day. We could be zone all day. We could be zone duo mix. We could be zone counter mix. We could do a little bit of everything. We could do some weird stuff, and you won't know what you're going to get. Therefore, you have to study tape and practice for everything. And you can really spread your opponent's preparation resources thin, but you got to be able to teach it all. If you can teach it all, this is what I think the Lions did really, really well last year. This is, I think, honestly, the underrated key to the Lions was for the last couple years is that they did this really, really, really well. They taught a big diversity of run plays. The Eagles too. I think the Eagles got to the Super Bowl in 2022 on this. I really do. The diversity of run plays, and then the diversity of kinds of play action you can run off of that, and passing games that can happen off of that, right? By spreading your opponent's resources thin, you can really try to catch them off guard, especially like if you just did, we're going to be a zone team for the last 2 games because that's what we think is best against their defense. And then you show up as a counter team for week 3, but week 3 opponent actually totally got you and was way more prepared for that than you thought. You can go back and say, hey, remember all the zone stuff from last week? We're actually going to go back to that because they prepared for something else here. And those are the kinds of adjustments that you make, after a couple of drives when you've seen things. Having those tools in your toolbox is really, really helpful. So that's the counter thing. For the rest of the show, we're going to talk about Henry Bird. We're going to do his entry in the Everyman series here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The Everyman series is a summer tradition here on the Locked On Vikings podcast where we go over the backstories, the journey to the NFL for every new Minnesota Viking. Today we are doing Henry Bird, the second year. He's listed as a guard, but he played mostly tackle out of Princeton. Spent some time, he was an undrafted free agent for the Broncos last year. Didn't make the team and spent a little time on our practice squad. That's how he got here. But let's go way back to him in high school. He went to Ensworth in Nashville, Tennessee. And there he was, like you'll hear about a lot of the guys that, end up in the NFL, multi-sport athlete. How about a little football, a little basketball, a little lacrosse, and wouldn't you know it, a little bit of tap dancing. Look, lacrosse is great just for cardio, but I think basketball players who then become linemen or tight ends, you get very fleet of foot, and that can help in a whole bunch of different ways, especially when you're talking about pass sets and stuff. But tap dancing, and by the way, tap dancing, he really liked it. He actually sort of fell in love with tap dancing, and kind of a bit of a theater kid. So he's this great novelty everywhere he goes. He's the lineman that did some tap dancing. And everybody will always ask him, and he'll have the same answers about does that help you in football? And he's like, of course it does. Because tap dancing is truly, not only is it about learning how to move your feet quickly, which is very, very important on offensive line, but to do so and to maintain balance. For a big lineman, it's also very funny to imagine, but you got to remember he was probably about 100 pounds lighter than he is as a full-grown adult and an NFL-sized one. But he's enjoying it and also learning some of those very important skills. So he also gets into Ivy League. So grades are fantastic too. Just one of those kids that just excels at everything he touches. So he goes to Princeton. He's a freshman there. His first year is 2018. And the 2018 Princeton Tigers are a very good football team for Ivy League. They are cleaning up their opponents very, very well, which means that the freshmen get in a lot. He gets a lot of mop-up duty, which is going to help him a lot when it's the last game of the season and the starter at left tackle goes down. He's going to have to play, I think, all, if not most, of the game. So suddenly you're very, very nervous, right? This is your first college football game. You're going up on the quarterback's blind side, but he sort of draws on that the confidence that he has from performing. You do learn how to deal with your nerves, and the confidence that he built over the course of the season, getting in and mop up duty. And this is going to be real duty, but that helped sort of bridge that gap. So you're not just getting thrown into like unfamiliar territory. And it's the last game of the season, right? Like you've got a rhythm for the season down a little bit too. You understand the playbook by now and all that. He also credits, he plays well for all intents and purposes. No disasters happen. They win the game by like 30. Pretty good day. He also credits the team around him. It was just a really good unit with a lot of good leadership and good culture and all that. And of course, it's very easy for everybody to come together when you're winning a lot, but they won a lot. Hey, so sue them. Over the course of his time in Princeton, there's a lot of quarterback carouseling going on, which means he has to get used to a lot of different styles. And that is more important than you think. You got to get used to different like gates, just like drop back gates. So you have to get used to dropping the different pass sets. But I mean, stylistically, it's all over the map. You got pocket passers. You've got guys that like to run. You got guys that prefer that, you bring them up over the top. You got guys that prefer that, you seal them off, give me an escape lane. You have all kinds of different stuff. Guys that hold on to the ball, guys that are quick and you want to, be better at jump sets. So he gets this like versatility of experience that he feels helps him out quite a bit. But his time in the pros isn't exactly prolific so far. He didn't get drafted. He ends up getting a shot at Denver Broncos camp last year. Doesn't make the team. He just kind of floats in nowhere until I think October of last year. The Vikings bring him in on the practice squad. You remember the Vikings were doing a ton of stuff with like random tackles and stuff last year. So he hangs out on the Vikings practice squad. He ends up getting cut from the Vikings practice squad and then spends some time with 49ers before ending up back in Minnesota, futures contract, genuine chance to make the roster here this time. So he's been in the building and he understands what we're doing a little bit, which will give him a bit of a leg up on, undrafted rookies coming in or other, low tier free agents that are coming in trying to make the team that just showed up to the building, 2 or 3 months ago. But I think the name of the game here, the story of Henry Bird, just comes down to just variety. Like there's a lot of different experiences all piling into one guy. And that is, if that's the kind of thing that compels you, maybe he can be your favorite little pet project over the course of training camp. We'll see if he can find a way to crack the bottom parts of the roster, but I'm going to guess that he's still more of a practice squad type guy. And hey, maybe that's a living and someday, you find your way on it. But look, a lot of guys don't make the team their first year and then make it their second, third, fourth years. Blake Brando was one of those. He was a draft pick, but still. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. No idea what we're going to talk about tomorrow. We'll figure it out. I will see you for whatever crawls out of my brain. And as always, Skol.